Today we're going to talk about digital identification, also known as digital ID. I was engaging in some event management recently that required me to be managing some elements of the gate, and predominantly what we would call the deluxe gate lane, or the lane for all the large vehicles or large rigs, as I would call them. And I was quite alarmed by the percent of people coming through that actually had a digital identification instead of a physical card that we have had in the past. And I guess it got me pondering more about this topic, and it wasn't really something that I felt like I really wanted to share too much online, just with the nature of the topic and the things that it can carry. But life sometimes presents you with signs and symbols that make it pretty apparent, okay, it's time to have a little chat about that. So, first I'm going to express, I guess, some of the overarching potential concerns, potentialities that may come from using such a tool, as I can call it, looking at potential solutions, and then also some reminders at the end of just to bring ourselves back to center when we're having to engage with these tools. So when we're looking at some of the concerns of the digital ID, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to speak to the ones that are most prevalent within my community, those which are around me that are close to me. There's a resonance in regards to how life is engaged with, and the things that we inspire to be involved in now and also potential future. One of them is obviously the ownership of the identification. So who actually owns the identification? Is that something that you necessarily own as the person that's identified? Or is it owned by a governmental department or a completely other entity altogether? So, I'm not going to go too much, and I'm not going to dive too deep into these aspects, but I'm just going to speak to them very briefly. The other one is, touching on the concerns of autonomy and freedom of choice. Will there always be a choice as to whether you wish to obtain one when you could potentially show your identification through other means? Because if it becomes something that you must have and no other form of identification is accepted, then that leads us down a path of, well, is there any autonomy in this? I mean, at the moment, they are saying that it is a choice, depending on what nation you live in and depending on what entity is asking for this as well, because for some places, they'll say that if it's a private entity, then they can make up their own choice, or if it's a governmental entity, then, they can't make it mandatory, or vice versa as well. And so, there are those that are elderly, is one example. I mean, I currently am in a town at the moment while I'm recording this where a huge percentage of the population is over the age of 65. And as some of you are aware, those that are over the age of 65, they can struggle to use technology, and requiring them to have a digital identification could be a challenge for them. Now, that's just one group of people that may not wish to engage in identity that's purely only digital. And if you take the choice away from them, then what do we do, and how do we assist those that are elderly, or those that either physically or energetically cannot engage with obtaining a digital identification? Now, another concern is obviously the dependency on foreign entities. Obviously it's someone's entity, but if it's not from your nation, they are considered foreign, right? And cloud providers. Now, if something is to occur in regards to the nation that foreign entity resides in, and or the cloud resides in. What happens if something happens to the effect that it can't be obtained, or data is lost, data is collected without consent, it's used for fraudulent purposes. How far can your own nation go in regards to protecting that for its citizens if they're not the holder or the storer of the identification? Now, there's another element to this, which is also, I haven't seen it talked about too much within my own circles, but I guess they would probably call it something else. And that, what I would call, is digital colonialism, which can often be a lack of reflection of the local law. And we're not just talking LAW, we're talking LOR here, and cultural values, as well as also representing forms of identification, and the potential element of data appropriation as well. So these are elements that we might talk about culturally in the context of, say we were to use things like the context of racism, and how certain ideologies can be opposed upon others, and how detrimental that can be, and how much more sensitive we often are to that, or can be to that, because the people have lived there for such a long time, and then colonialists have come over and tried to impose these ideologies. Now, that doesn't just also mean in regards to physical, material aspects of worlds. We're also talking about digital, and how how some of these things. It's almost, the question is like, how do you propose that you try and digital identification, digital ID certain things within cultural and law concepts that the material world lacks a depth of wisdom and an understanding of? So hence why, it can lead to a lack of actual reflection of the culture itself, as well as also misrepresenting what they consider to be forms of identification, and also, the data appropriation. It's trying to grasp a concept of, like, let's just say, some wisdom that a 100-year-old person knows, when the colonialist really only has the wisdom of a 2-year-old in regards to that realm of knowledge or wisdom. So, yeah, that's a really big topic. There's a lot that could be said in there as well. Also, the question arises of who can collect the data, who processes it, and who shares the data, and what purpose is it for? Because, as some of you are aware, we are told, oh, you must do this thing, and this is the reasons why, when there's actually a whole other agenda going on behind. And that's often how, you can convince someone to do something, say it be through particular virtues, or pressing on particular ethical elements. And it's basically, you're straight up lying. If you were to put it in a simple format, you're lying to the person and saying, this is why we're doing it, but we're actually doing it for another reason. And or this is why we're doing it, and we're also doing it because of all these other things as well. So going back to that sort of digital colonialism, if we're trying to impose these kind of LAWs across a nation that has, yes, it has universal LOREs, but then there's also variations of that LORE as it comes through into the material realm. It's almost like trying to impose like this universal LAW across all these nations that have varying perspectives and values and beliefs on how to do life. And, if you live in a nation that might be quite unique in how you live life in a particular way, and it works well for your people, and someone else is collecting data about your nation that's not your nation, and they're processing it, and they're sharing it with other things. And then rules are being imposed about the data. And when data is collected this way, or it shows this result, then these are the rules that should be applied upon you. You can see where the challenges can arise there. And, there's obviously that whole element of social credits, which is something that some nations have been engaging with for more than 10 years now. And, it can go so as far as, your car might not be able to turn on. You might not be allowed to drive to a particular place. Not because you've been drink driving or you've been speeding, but because you have expressed an opinion online that you prefer your t-shirts to be purple when they want them to be green. Now, this is just a metaphor here, and you can insert your own perception of what I'm saying there. But you can see how that can lead to a rather interesting universal lifestyle across the globe that has quite a level of density and darkness to it. So yeah, the question is really, what's the purpose? What's the actual true purpose as to why is this being offered? And then also why is it being mandated if it is being mandated? I've heard that in the UK, they're saying that you're going to need it if you were to change employment. They are still providing an option that you can obviously not engage in that. But if you choose to not engage in that, then there's a particular fee. Now, as someone who is very much a proponent of choice, I like the idea that there's still a choice. It sounds like it's a bit of a punishment if you can't provide it, because then you're having to pay additional money. But for myself, I would still be willing to accept at least there's a choice. As to where that money gets spent, well, let's not even go to that. So the way I see it, as long as there is still a choice, the problem is obviously if you are not privileged enough, if I can put it that way bluntly as possible, then you won't be able to afford to choose the other option, which is a whole other thing. So I won't go too much further into that. And then we get to the concept of identity, right? Like, who actually owns our identity? Is identity something that we own, or is it something that's granted by systems, or is it something much larger? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end. So when we're looking at potential solutions, as I've touched on, having options. I'm a big proponent for having options. Should one decide or not be able to engage with having a digital identification, some of the solutions could be having a decentralized models. Also, looking at things like zero knowledge proofs, as we would call them, without revealing unnecessary personal data. So it's like, if it's required for identifying if you have received any driving fines, then that's the only purpose it's used for. When that entity is given access to it, then they're only given the data that's actually properly required for that. They don't need to be given any data about how many times did you look at a Facebook page, or whether you are spending your money on this thing or that thing. Now, I can see, so I'm living in the lands of Amaru, and I've also lived in the lands of Aotearoa. And I remember before I left Aotearoa, they were bringing in certain restrictions around how much money could you withdraw from the bank. And then also, if you're withdrawing over a particular amount, then you were required to explain why you need to take the money out of the bank. And then if the bank did not deem, or their supposed rules or policies did not deem that to be appropriate, then they could do various things to your account. And this has been going on in Aotearoa for many years. I mean, I worked in banking way back as early as 2012. So, and now I'm starting to see that being imposed on other nations. And if some of you are not aware, Aotearoa is often used as lands for experimenting on particular things. And so there'll be things that may be introduced to these lands a lot sooner than particular other westernized nations. And Aotearoa could be seen as a bit of a testing land for such things. So now I'm starting to see it a lot more imposed here in the lands of Amaru. People are starting to stress about that. And, and there's also some stories of how digital ID can be used for, measuring what money you're spending. There's potentiality of limiting where you can spend your money, why you spend your money. And for most of us, we're not engaging in fraudulent behavior. For myself, I love to spend my money on organic food and supporting local businesses, who are offering various crafts and services and products that I would use and that I would consider to be more of the sort of eco-friendly or ethically sourced. So I enjoy spending my money on those sorts of things. But then if I was being told like, oh, you brought 5 oranges today and that means you can't buy any more oranges this week, like I would be, I'd be a bit stressed. But then again, there's always a solution, right? Which is growing food. So even though there might not always appear to be very prevalent solutions provided, the one being like, oh, well, you can do digital ID or you can pay $85. There will also be, if you tap into an inner wisdom that's within you, and you may find that around you, if you're in the right state of being, there will also always be other options and solutions. So this is where I'm coming into of that will be there. And there's there's a bifurcation, trification, even if you go that way, with particular avenues and ways in which we're living. There'll be groups of people that live in particular ways and some that live in a mixture, and then others that will live in a very, almost like a polarity of ways of life. And you'll find that there is always options. There will always be options. You just have to be open to them, and you also have to be willing to, some would say sacrifice, but you have to be willing to do life differently for those options to be open and available to you. So sometimes it means that you may have to give up, or you don't engage much with particular aspects of community, I wouldn't even say community, but social norms or mainstream norms. So, you might not be able to do X, Y, and Z, but you've got other options of being able to still feed yourself, still provide power, still have education for your children, all these kinds of things. And that comes from a deep trust and surrender, and knowing that you're not necessarily the controller, and nor what they wish you to believe, but if whatever higher power that you engage with, that there is with you, and you can engage with that on a regular basis and ask for that to assist you in finding options of how to navigate digital ID. Digital ID is only one aspect of the potential other things that may unfold, and again, it's a metaphor for many aspects. So remembering it's a tool as well, so that if you do end up engaging with it, are you engaging with it with a proper intention, or are you just being swept up in what it's directing you to do, if I can put it that way? It's also having this awareness over automation. So that's where the intention's coming in, of like, actually, I'm using it. This is why I'm using it. I only need it for this aspect. I don't need it for any of these other aspects. There's ways in which you might be able to have some of your data tracked, but you can opt out of some of your data not being tracked in regards to maybe the social media aspects of it. Or you can decide to not even have social media that is engaging with that digital ID. And this is also, now I'm leading on to back to the identity, who owns your identity? Are we granting it to our systems? Your inner identity, this is a little reminder, is much bigger than some 3-dimensional digital identity. And there's an interesting metaphor in that the three-dimensional digital ID is trying to impose an identity upon you, or it could be seen in that way. But if you always remember what your true identity is, it'll never really have that much power over you. It has power over you to the effect that you give it that power. And again, if you are having to engage with it, or anything digitally, right, it's practicing that discernment. When we go back to how our ancestors used to live, when they engaged with the physical world, they were engaging with it with a level of discernment. And it's no different when you're engaging with the digital world. We just don't have cultures that are alive here today in the physical form that can pass on like elder knowledge. I guess say one of my basic three-dimensional identities is that I could be grouped into the generation of the millennial. And we are like one of the very last generations in Western countries to have potentially been brought up without as much digitization in our world. Like, I didn't grow up with a computer. I didn't have a cell phone. So these things were kind of then introduced to me after birth. Whereas for many people that are being born now, it's already part of their family home. They have a computer, they have tablets, they have phones. They're already present, already in the family home. So, yeah. And, I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near an elder yet of any of this realm. And yet the responsibility will probably be placed upon us to assist the generations that are to come. And I just trust that will build upon itself. But yes. So there's a lot to go through with the digital ID. A lot could be shared, a lot could be said. There's also a lot that cannot be shared on such platforms. If you've got any questions, you're welcome to leave that in the comment section down below. I've got my social media links as well down in the description box. And I'll see you in the next vlog.